Okay, so this is a 2-hour CE. We're going to go over the 2020, 2021, 2022 TREC changes, the farm and ranch contract. New addendums, amend or not to amend, exception documents, ag, and rollback. Now, these changes, you know, your new contracts go in effect February the 1st, all right? They'll be in your zip forms and they'll be on TREC so you can use them, but make sure that when you're getting offers from, especially for sell by owners, that the date on the contract is correct, okay? And we'll go over that. Okay, farm and ranch contract. A farm and ranch contract would be used generally for a rural property with metes and bounds and a legal description. All right. Now I know there's no like a rule or law or anything like that that says 1 to 4 or farm and ranch. But what you really need to consider is if you're dealing with farm and ranch, the things that are on the contract are not on 1 to 4. And I know a lot of people still use the 1 to 4 when they have farm and ranch. They're supposed to use it. And they miss a lot of the sections to where it would benefit their clients and make a big difference. I think what I usually tell people is if you've got more than 5 acres, if you've got a home on it, of course it has to be more than 5 acres, and if it's got ag. If it's got ag, you need to use farm and ranch, okay? If you've got more than 5 acres, you need to use farm and ranch, okay? Additionally, used for properties that are relevant to farms and ranches that address crops, livestock, I said crops, was crops, livestock, mineral rights, pasture leases, and other unique issues that are not addressed in other contracts. There are items such as land rights, utilities, and zoning that are more specific and important to transactions involving farm and ranch. All right? Always use a farm and ranch contract when property has an ag exemption. That's always important, and you'll see why. Okay, so let's start with the first page of the contract. And you can just write your handout, just make notes on that. So now the date starting February the 1st, and you may be using them already, which is fine, but February the 1st, you have to use them for TREC to be in compliance. The date needs to be 11/7 of 2022. That's the date that TREC made all the changes, and that's the effective date that the contracts are going to be. So starting February the 1st, that's going to be your 1 to 4, that's going to be your addendums, that's going to be your contracts. That's what needs to be done. Farm and ranch, when you're dealing with a for sale by owner, they're going to pull it off, you know, the internet, and it could be dated 20 years ago, or they could handwrite. So make sure to be in compliance, make sure you're using that date. Does everybody know the new date now for the contracts? All right, so legal description. All right, so 2022 revision to paragraph 2A adds the term counties to reflect the fact that farm and ranch properties could be located across 2 or more counties. And it happens a lot in the Bullitt area because you've got why? You've got Smith, you've got Cherokee. So they finally realized that, hey, that might be an issue because you need to know if county or counties, and that way you'll make sure that you put Cherokee and you put Smith, okay? Because you may have a legal description that has that. So you make sure you put that in there, all right? Additionally, the phrase including but not limited to water rights, claims, permits, strips, gores, easements, and cooperative or association memberships is deleted from there. I don't even know why they put that on there anyway, but they deleted that. You can see right below that. Now let's talk about legal description. When you're dealing with farm and ranch, your legal description, 99% of the time, are you going to be able to get it in that little area? No, you're not, okay? So what are you going to use? Exhibit A, right, and you're going to go, okay, where do I get an Exhibit A? So I would not encourage anybody to go and try to type one up. Don't do that. Call the title company, call on either examiner or one of your closers and say, hey, I'm listing this property. This is the address. Can you pull the last deed on this to make number one, make sure that it is the seller that can sell this property. And number two is, I need the Exhibit A. I need the legal description. I need the Exhibit A from there. So they will email you a copy of that warranty deed that's got the legal description. Pull it off of there, attach it to it. Number one, though, make sure If it says it's 100 acres and all you're selling is 80, then you're going to need another legal description because that's going to be different. So make sure it's the right acreage and make sure you got the seller. So, and if you don't have an examiner in your back pocket, you really need one. There are some that work for title companies that are more than willing to help you to get things like that, to check and see if they're, it's the right seller. Does most everybody have an examiner that they can call? Good. You need one. If you don't, call a title company and say, hey, I would call the title company's rep and say, do you have an examiner that I can email or call and ask for these things? And they'll give that to you, okay? Not all of them do that, but I know some of them do, absolutely. So make sure you do that because in title, I can't tell you how many times that we would get a contract and they would try to squeeze all of that on there. And they would leave it out, all right? And then they would add it to where? Special provisions. And that's a no-no. You don't ever put your legal description in special provisions. Don't ever put 100 acres. Don't ever put anything like that that has anything to do with the legal description in special provisions. You need to put Exhibit A. Now remember, if you do Exhibit A, you'll put it on here, see Exhibit A. Where else are you going to put it? You're going to put it from, I think, page 8 or 9 where it has the addendums. You're going to put it there as well, all right? Because you're telling the contract and telling the people that I've also added something else. So you're going to add it there as well. So don't forget that, okay? Because that's going to be something that's added to that contract, so they'll make sure they've got it, all right? Any questions on Exhibit A? And if there's different counties, make sure that the title company knows that there are 2 different counties. Make sure they pay attention to that, all right? Because why? Can somebody tell me why? Property taxes, all right? If they think it's all in Smith, what are they going to pull? All Smith property taxes. If you've got Smith and you've got Cherokee, they need to pull tax certificate from Smith and Cherokee. Title companies will miss that. I know they will because I know some that do. So just make sure that they're aware of that because it's going to be very important. If you're listing a piece of property and it's in Smith and Cherokee, make sure that you, if you're listing, make sure you put that in MLS. If your buyer's looking at that, make sure you go on the appraisal district, you look at the taxes and let them know what they are for both, okay? Because they're going to get that information to their lender and that affects what? Their payment. So that's real important, all right? Do not add it to special provisions. Remember, title companies do not examine by property addresses. They go by legal. So if you put the property address in there, they're not going to go by property addresses. Title companies examine and close by legal description. And if the legal description's not right, what else is not going to be right? Lender documents. Because when title sends that commitment out to that lender, what does the lender do? Cut and paste. Or they'll grab that Exhibit A and add it to all of their documents. So when you get your title commitment from the title company, look at that legal description and make sure it's correct, especially meets and bounds. Because you've got, if it's one word that's wrong in there, it messes the whole thing up, okay? It could be left pen, and it should be right pen, and that messes everything up, okay? It messes up your deed, messes everything up in recording. So make sure that's correct, all right? 22 revision to paragraph 2B is amended to make the terms house and garage. So farm and ranch improvements following permanently installed and built in, and it gives, this is why, another reason why it's so important to use farm and ranch when you're dealing with farm and ranch instead of 1 to 4, because 1 to 4 doesn't have this. Windmills, tanks, barns, pens, fences, gates. So we added residential improvements, any houses and garages. So instead of house and garage, because sometimes in a farm and ranch, you do have more. You do have more garages because they may have equipment they have to keep in their garages. They have more houses. They may have several houses on the property that maybe they have tenants in that work on the farm and ranch, all right? That's why they changed that. No changes to this section, but very important, if these accessories are not mentioned here to be conveyed to the new buyer, they need to be marked or written in. This area is specific to farm and ranch accessories, okay? Let's talk about that. D&E, where any crops will be harvested by the date of possession and be retained and must be removed prior to possession. Why is that important? And here it is right here, crops. Why is that important? So let's say you're closing and they've got crops. So they've got hay and they sell hay, and they can't cut it now. It won't be ready for 3 months. But that seller may be thinking that when it's cut, what are they going to get? The money for that. Okay. So when you're listing that, you say, are there any crops or anything? Could be timber. They could have timber ag, and they think that timber is going to be cut maybe a week or two after closing. They think in their mind that's theirs. It's not. You got to address that. The buyer may be driving around thinking, oh good, that hay's not going to be ready yet, but when it is, it's going to be mine. So that needs to be addressed before that. Keep all of that in mind, because if not, it needs to be, because it says crops unless otherwise agreed in writing. The seller has the right to harvest all growing crops until delivery of possession of the property. But what happens after that? That's what you've got to address, okay? So remember that. All right, guys? Still on page 1. Let's talk about 2F reservations. No changes were made to this section. Any reservation for oil, gas, or other mineral, water, timber, or other interest is made in accordance with the attached addendum. Who can tell me what that addendum is? All right. Addendum for reservation of oil, gas, and other minerals. So make sure, pay attention to that, because, okay, so let me tell you about that. In MLS, if you're looking in MLS, if you're listing and they're going to reserve minerals, you need to put it in MLS, okay? That needs to be put in there, that seller retains all minerals. Because remember, unless they're reserved, they're always what? Conveyed. Transfer, they're always conveyed, okay? So and the seller may think they have some, and they may in fact have some. Is the title company going to say, yes, they do have some? No. Title company does not for one thing, they don't insure minerals. But they need the information, they need that addendum, because the warranty deed has to have that language. So instead of conveyed, it's going to be what? Reserved. So it's very important when that warranty deed is correct, because if it's not, it's going to say they're conveyed. I know a big lawsuit that just happened as a realtor in this county, and she put in MLS that it was reserved, but guess what? She forgot the addendum, she forgot to put it on the contract, and when the property was sold, that warranty deed said it was conveyed, so that buyer got those minerals. And guess what? The buyer kept those minerals. So be very careful. Just because it's MLS, it's got to follow through, because that contract obviously trumps MLS, all right? Because that was her deal. She said it's MLS. So when in the contract, you're going to have an addendum. So make sure that, okay? Make sure that's correct, because you will need that. And also with title, they're going to put it on Schedule B. They're going to show that the seller is going to retain them, but they're not going to insure it. Title doesn't research them. If you have a buyer that wants to know, or a seller that wants to know if they do have minerals, or a buyer wants to know if that land has minerals, who are they going to have to hire? Landman. Exactly. You're going to have to hire a landman to see if they actually have any minerals that buyer may be able to negotiate to buy, to purchase. And it's expensive, and it takes 3 or 4 months to do it, especially in these different counties. If you're in Wood County or anything like that, it may take forever, because they may have to go back to dirt, which, that means they're at the courthouse trying to find these documents, and it's almost impossible. So keep that in mind. I got a call from a realtor the other day, and she was, she said, what is, because she had a buyer that moved from state here and wants to find land and wants to own the minerals. What are the chances of that? What do you think? Slim and none. Yeah. I said, you don't really have them anymore. If they are, it's very, very rare. Absolutely, it is. And I think people think that I'm going to move to Texas and I'm going to get me some land, and that's not going to happen. Okay. All right. So let's see. Always remember, per contract, the seller has either agreed to convey all interest in the property, including the mineral interest, or retain them. So important. Don't forget surface rights. All right. So let's talk about surface rights. In Texas, ownership of the mineral estate can be separated, severed from the surface rights. Okay. Surface rights is water rights. Now, you think about water, we're talking about water well. I'll give you a good example. There was a deal that we closed. I closed it years ago. He had 25 acres, and he was going to keep 10 and sell the rest. But that water well was on his 10 acres, okay? And he was going to, in an addendum, they put in there that he was retaining surface rights. That means that was his well, that the new owner had to dig their own well. Well, they didn't quite catch what surface rights were, and they didn't really understand what they were going to do. So they closed and moved in, and he goes, okay, why don't I have any water? Call the title company. The realtor's like, what's going on? They have no water. The seller said they retained them. Yeah, that's what that addendum was. They retained surface rights, which is a water well. So if you're looking for land, you make sure that if it's separated, if there's not a well on there and this other party, that's where that well's coming from, that water, you got to make sure that they're going to be able to have access to that. If not, they're going to have to dig a well. And digging wells are very expensive, very expensive. It's going to be, surface rights going to be in a lease. Let's say there's a lease on the property and Exxon has it. And they're going to be in there, they're going to have ingress or egress easement on it. That means they have surface rights to get on there, or it could say surface rights. Another one would be if they had timber or something like that. Now, having access to a property, you're probably talking about an easement, but if it's but if it's a lease, you're going to have egress, ingress, and that means they have those rights to get on there. But when we talk with minerals, when we talk about surface rights, we're talking about water. Or we're talking about, let's say that they grow crops and they have a lease on those crops. That's going to be surface rights as well. It's going to say in that lease they have the right to go on there and then either harvest it or crop it or whatever they need to. Okay? I can't tell you how many times when I was in title, people would bring me a contract and they were landlocked because they said, well, there's a road over there, but guess what? They're going to need access to get there, and that seller is not willing to give them an easement for that. So when you're looking at that, and you think, well, how often is that? There's quite a bit. There's a lot of land out there that is landlocked because grandpa deeded grandson, just deeded it or gift deeded it to him, and now, they're grown, their children are trying to sell it, and they can't sell it because it's landlocked because somebody else owns that property or are not willing to grant access to it. If a third party owns mineral interest and the parties are using the TREC farm and ranch contract, the seller may want to include the information on paragraph 6E exception documents. We'll go over exception documents in a minute. I can't tell you how important that is, especially if you're taking a listing in farm and ranch, that you need to get all of that up front when you're taking that listing with them, especially before they start packing and moving everything. So it's really important. Again, if the seller is retaining any oil and gas or other mineral, water, timber, any interest, you need to attach the addendum to the contract. Very important. All right, so now another one, let's look at paragraph 3D, 2022 revision. 3D is amended to alter the calculation of the sales price. Adjust should be that survey reveal a difference in acreage. This is another reason why it's so important if you're dealing with more than 5 acres to use a farm and ranch and not a 1-to-4, because 1-to-4 doesn't have this on there. And when you're dealing with a farm and ranch, do not leave anything in A, B, C, or D blank. Do not leave it blank. I would get contracts and they would leave them blank. And if we'll go over that, and I'll tell you, any one of those areas, if it's blank and that survey comes back, and let's say, granddad thinks he's got 100 acres, but he forgot about 20 he gave grandson, 20 years ago. He forgot about that. So survey comes back and then realize you only own 20 acres. Oh, okay, that's right, I forgot it, I did that. Well, is that going to make a difference in the sales price? Absolutely. Other thing to think about, let's say you've got a home and the home is a $3 million property, and then you've got 20 acres you're selling. Is that acre that house is $3 million, is that the same price as all that other? No. So that's why it's so important. You've got to make sure this is filled out. So you've got the cash portion of the sales price payable at closing. The term cash portion of the sales price does not include proceeds from borrowing any kind of or selling other property except as disclosed in this contract. B is going to be the financing, and C is the sales price. D, the sales price will or will not be adjusted based on the survey required by paragraph 6C. If the price is adjusted, the sales price will be adjusted. It says adjusted, that used to say calculated, but TREC decided to change it to adjusted based on the difference between blank acreage and the acreage set forth in the survey required by paragraph 6C. The difference in acreage, either increased or decreased, shall be multiplied by the sum of blank per acre and either added to or subtracted from the sales price in this paragraph. If the sales price is adjusted more than 10%, this was a change several years ago, either party may terminate this contract by providing written notice to the other party within blank days after the terminating party receives a survey. If neither party terminates the contract after the termination, the contract variance is 10% or less, the adjustment will be made to the amount in 3A or 3B, proportional to 3A, 3B. Don't leave any of that blank. Any of that blank. Even though your seller says they're 100%, they know they're selling 10 acres, they could be. But it could come back at 8 or it could come back as 12. And to protect your client both ways, make sure all of that is filled out. Have you ever done a farm and ranch and seen that those aren't filled out? And it's scary too, because then it's hard to negotiate after everybody signed off on something. Next, look paragraph 4 on page 1, 2021 revision, paragraph 4, leases. Address leases in which the seller's party of includes language regarding disclosure of existing leases, including residential leases, fixture leases, natural resource leases. And prohibits the seller from executing any new leases or amending any lease without the buyer's written consent after the effective date of the contract. Okay, so residential leases, 2021. So you're saying, why would residential lease be on a farm and ranch? There's a lot of them. They lease some of they have houses, especially if they have 100 acres. They have several different people that live on their property, and they lease that house to them, part of their pay or part of this, because they work for them. Well, that's a residential lease. That lease has to be part of that contract. So when you're talking to these, your seller, and you're taking that listing and say, do you have any residential leases? Do you have any leases? Now, they could have done it, this guy could have worked for him for 40 years, and it could have been a handshake. You're going to need that in writing. Okay, let's get something in writing and get everybody to sign off on it, because that buyer has to have a copy of those leases. All right? Fixture leases on the property are subject to one or more fixture leases, for example, solar panels, propane tanks, water softener, security systems, and the addendum, it's a new addendum regarding fixture leases is attached to this contract. You got to have it on there, all right? Natural resource leases. Natural resource leases means existing oil and gas, mineral, water, wind, or other natural lease affecting the property to which the seller is a party of. This is a fixture lease. If the house you're selling or your buyer's purchasing has solar panels, propane tanks, generators, now they're renting generators, especially if you have 2 or 3 and have big homes. They used to just sell them, but now they've gotten so popular, they're renting them. There's leases on them, okay? Can someone tell me something you have seen other than these that are on a farm and ranch? Security. So what about corrals, farm equipment, and trailers? They don't buy those anymore. They lease those, all right? So when you're taking that listing and you're looking out there and you see corrals and you see tractors, you see all that, you go, are those leased? Yes, they're leased. Okay, if there's a lease on something like that, what does that do to that property? It's a lien on the property. Okay, so when they lease that, whether it's solar panels or whether it's farm equipment, you sign a lease, but they also put a lien on that property. Why? Because if you don't pay it, they're going to come get it. Okay? So make sure that you tell your seller, I need a copy of those leases. What else? Why else would you need a copy of those leases? What if in that lease it said the buyer had so the buyer says, I'm gonna take over the leases. I need all that equipment, and they're going to take over these leases. But what if in that lease it says they have to qualify, and they can't? Then what happens? It usually says if they don't qualify, then it has to be paid off at closing. All right? So then the seller's looking at, wait a minute, and I didn't agree to that. So you get those leases. That's why it's so important. Get them way ahead of time. Don't wait till you get an offer on the contract and start scrambling for those leases, okay? Make sure you get them all. If you can't read that lease, if it's not specific enough to say it can be transferred or it has to be paid off, where do you take it? Or where do you tell your seller to take it? To an attorney. Because you cannot interpret that lease. You cannot say, well, it looks like, not really specific, but it looks like you could probably transfer it without any consequences. Don't tell them that, because then what are you doing? Giving legal advice. So be very careful. Get those leases, anything, residential, surface, anything like that. Make sure that if they're not specific enough, that you can read those, okay? Issues regarding leases, again, is a lease transferable? Does the new buyer have to qualify? What if they don't qualify? What if the leaseor requires the lease to be paid off? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they, no, we're going to lease it to you, but if you sell the property, you're going to need to pay that off. How long will it take title and escrow to get a payoff? Try to get a payoff from a company, a solar panel company in California. It takes a long time. It's not like a mortgage. You call 500 different people. First, the seller's got to call, give permission for the title company, and then it's just it takes a while. So make sure you get all of that information, okay? At closing, and I know when you've been in closing, there's a document, and it used to be one document. Now it's like 25 different paragraphs. They shortened it about this much, and one of them is affidavit of debts and liens. And in that, they ask, do you have any liens on the property besides what we're collecting? And usually what is the one that everybody thinks that's the only lien is? The mortgage. On the mortgage. Well, no, what about the corrals put on the lease? What about the solar panels? Those are all liens on the property as well. So if they sign that affidavit saying that's it, then the title company's off the hook, but the seller's not. Okay, natural resource leases, 2021 revisions. Resource leases referring to gas, oil, and minerals. There are two boxes to choose from in this section. C, if the seller has delivered to buyer all the leases, or 2, seller has not delivered to buyer a copy of the leases. Seller shall provide a buyer a copy within 3 days of the effective date. It's very important in the new contracts when they change them in 2021, there's 3 outs that a buyer has that can walk. All right, and here's the first one. And very important, buyer may terminate the contract after receipt of the lease within blank days after the date the buyer receives all natural resource leases, and earnest money shall be refunded to buyer, period, end of conversation. There's no, does the seller agree? Doesn't matter. Watch that date. You know, if you don't have it, if you're representing the buyer, you don't have it, put in there, 4 or 5 days, give them a chance to get that lease and make sure that, because that lease does what? That lease affects that property, all right? They're buying that according to that lease. So make sure that they're okay with that. And if they're not, make sure that they don't pass the dates, because they have day 4 days in there and it's day 5, can they still terminate? No, they cannot. All right? 2022 revision, new paragraph 4D added. Surface leases. To address surface leases, it includes options regarding whether the seller has delivered copies of written leases or provide notice of oral leases to the buyer. Similar to the existing natural resource lease paragraph, the corresponding language in page 6F is also amended. They put surface leases because of that example I gave about the water and that closing that we did. You know, finally they realized that there is an issue with surface water in surface leases, okay? So surface leases means existing lease for surface only if the property, for example, grazes, leases, hunting leases, agriculture, recreational, wind leases, solar leases, timber leases, and forestry. Check all boxes. Seller is agreed, seller's not agreed, and got them, okay? It's also water as well for water rights. Okay, paragraph 5, page 2, revisions. Paragraph 5, now we all know this, and it was made in 2021. Everybody's really happy that option money goes to where now? Title company. You know, I never understood why they didn't get it in the first place, but they do, finally. So that option paragraph was on paragraph 23 of the contract. They moved it to this page. They put it under earnest money and termination option. So, and nothing's changed there, just of course, if third day falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday, it rolls over to the next business day. The check or checks have to be delivered to the title company within 3 days of the executed date. Don't forget that 3 days. You know, I mean, it's 3 days. Not much now, but this time last year when people were writing offers and taking offers right and left, and they got a better offer, those realtors were looking at that 3 days, and that next morning of day 4, they would pull those contracts and pull in that next one. So, you know, and I had one realtor call me and said, she's coming in, she'll be there at 10. And I said, I got some bad news. I got a termination of the contract about 30 minutes ago on that one. So it's done, okay? So watch those dates. Page 6 on paragraphs, pages 2 and 3, title, policy, and survey. There were no revisions made to this area, but always seems very confusing. Okay, so we're talking about an area in the contract, and this is on 1 to 4, and it's on the farm and ranch. It's 6. Standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in the area or boundary line, encroachments, protrusions, or overlapping improvements. First one, will not be amended or deleted from the title policy, or will be amended to read shortages in the areas at the expense of blank buyer and blank seller. Does everybody know exactly what that means and exactly what, does anybody do it automatically? One person. You all should have your hands up. Should do it. You should all, and no matter, especially in meats, especially farm and ranch, 1 to 4, you should always, if you're representing the buyer, always have will be and buyer seller expense. And we'll talk about the expense in a minute. Now, if you take my classes and you check that, you can check seller because this has been around since 2020, but most realtors still don't know what it means, so they're going to let it slide and their seller pays for it. If you represent the seller, make sure you're not paying for it. If you represent the buyer, make sure you're getting this, okay? So let's talk about what it is. Okay, so what it is, and I know you've heard this before, it's called a lender. If the lender is involved, they sometimes tell their clients, I don't require a survey, but I require an endorsement that the title company needs a survey in order to issue that. So they require that. They say the title company needs the survey. I really don't, but we're going to ask for an endorsement. It's additional insurance. So the title company is going to require a survey. Have you ever heard that? Okay. So and everybody's confused, like, well, why is the title company need it? Well, the lender really needs it. It's an additional survey coverage, okay? So this coverage has been around for 30 years for the lenders. And 99% of the loans in the state of Texas, they're required to get this additional insurance. It's an additional endorsement. It's called the T19. And that's why they tell you. They say, I'm not going to need it, but I'm going to have survey coverage. So that's why they need that survey. So about 3 years ago, TDI, or about 5 years ago, however long that, about 5 years ago, TDI decided they're going to offer it to the buyers, okay? They're going to offer it to the buyers because there's so many lawsuits because of surveys are not always correct, okay? So they decided, they decided to add the same coverage, but they're going to add it also to the buyer, okay? So that's what that is. This is additional survey coverage for the buyer on their owner's policy. It starts the day they close to the future. Now, your title insurance covers you from the day they close to the past. Everything, and make sure everything's free and clear, your right liens on there, everything is. Going forward, there used to be no insurance, but now there is. There's this survey coverage, okay? So that survey coverage covers the buyer going forward as long as they own that home. So I'll give you a perfect example. That's probably why TDI decided to do this. There was a huge lawsuit. It was in Austin. And does anybody know any the property on Lake Austin? Those houses are $15 and $20 million properties, okay? So they bought one, the guy bought one, and he had a rock fence. It was way over $100,000 from the property all the way down as close to the shore you could get. So he put it on there, he moved in, had that built, and then about 6 months later, the seller decided he was going to sell his property. Didn't have a survey, got a new survey. That new survey he got showed that that fence, that rock, very expensive rock fence, was 3 feet on his property. Guess what? He goes over there and says, we got a problem. And then that buyer, that homeowner goes, nope, look at my survey. They go to court, the lawsuit, they get off surveyor after surveyor, plat after plat, and guess who's right? The seller. Neighbor next door, his survey is correct. That whoever surveyed that guy's property was incorrect. He was wrong. So if he had that insurance, he'd call the title company. The title company notified the underwriter, and the underwriter would have paid all legal fees and took their corporate attorneys to court and paid that. If they lost, they'd written a check. Instead, he had to tear that fence down and move it over. So what does he do now? Sues his realtor, sues his surveyor, sues everybody, but he doesn't win. Does that make, okay? See how important that is? So what this survey coverage is things that are discovered after, all right? Mistakes that are made and things that are discovered after. Has anybody ever had a survey and they realized that when they got the new one that there are changes? Okay, so, because surveyors make mistakes just like everybody else. They do. Their E&O insurance is not a lot, so you're not going to get a lot of money if you sue them, and they don't stay in business very long. If you've been doing this a long time, you know they don't. And it's very simple. It's additional coverage for your buyer. Number one is talk to your buyers about it. If they say no, they don't want it, then make sure they know what they're not getting, okay? Because we did have an issue at Landmark. There was a survey that was incorrect. They called, and they called their attorney. What did he do? He said, well, you should have gotten survey coverage. She didn't know what it meant, and guess what? She called her realtor, and her attorneys got involved because what did the realtor say? I didn't know what it meant. So make sure you have that discussion with them where they know what they're declining, all right? Okay, this is how I want you to think of how to remember what it covers, because it's not just about surveys. And this is how I do it, because I'm old, I have to remember things like I have to do abbreviations and then I remember. So think of it as MER, okay? Minerals, encroachments, and restrictions. That's what that insurance covers. Now you got to remember, it's going to cover, not going to cover something if your buyer gets Schedule B and they see Schedule B and they have these encroachments on there and they got all this stuff. That Schedule B says, you're buying this property with all this affects the property, but we're not insuring it. Everything on Schedule B is not insured. It's what's missed, what title companies miss, what examiners miss, and what surveyors miss. And they miss a lot, sometimes. All right, so benefits of buyer may include coverage and payment of loss arising out of the following unless exception to such matters is taken in the policy. Can't, like, for instance, I got a call the other day because I have a realtor and she doesn't quite understand what it is, but she puts it on every one for her buyer. She gets it. So she got a survey and the house was like 3 feet over the building line. She goes, it's going to be covered, isn't it? I go, no, remember, that's going to be on Schedule B. That's saying it's not covered because we know what it is. Obviously, insurance aren't going to cover it. It's going to cover something, let's say, that they saw that it was, but also the pool was half in an easement, but the surveyor didn't catch it. That would be. Okay? So, dispute with adjoining landowners over location of boundary lines, forced removal of improvements located across boundary lines, forced removal of driveways encroaching into adjoining driveway. There's a lot of them that the surveyors, that when they realize that when they're selling or they're buying something and they get a new survey and they're like, well, wait a minute, this foot, that the driveway, they didn't pour it right, they didn't do it right. My survey says it's right, but this one shows it's a foot over. And on farm and ranch, if they miss a ping, it could be a mess. That's why farm and ranch is so important. Includes provisions for damage improvements of property that is cause for future exercise of right to use the surface of the property for extraction or development of minerals. Current violations of restrictions that existed at closing but was not disclosed by the HOA. So there was a big company, it was an HOA company that they were selling. And this HOA company had been around for a long time, and they handled 4 or 5 HOAs. Well, this property was selling, and they were in the month where they were actually moving paper from one to the other. So the escrow officer sent the new company, hey, I need what your fees are and everything like that. And she goes, okay, here are fees. Here's what the fees are, like, if they had whatever fees they had. And they said, okay, and that's all they had right then. Later, a couple weeks later, they got something from the old company about past dues. But they forgot to send it to the title company. They were trying to get all their paperwork and everything. So they closed, everything was good until the buyer moves in. And a month later, this new HOA company is sending them saying they owe $1,700. Well, they called the title company and were like, wait a minute. You guys, well, no, they called them. No, we missed it. We were just a couple weeks off. We missed it. They had the insurance, and guess who paid the $1,700? The underwriter. Okay? So, unpaid assessments and HOA fees.
Who pays?
Do what? No, it doesn't matter who pays, seller or buyer. If you can get the seller to pay, go for it. If you can, if they know what it is, then they're probably going to, especially if that realtor knows what it is, they're going to come back and say buyer. Okay, so let's talk about cost. Okay, let's talk about cost for a 1 to 4 residential first. 1 to 4 residential contract, the cost is going to be 5% of the title premium. So on a $300,000 house, that insurance is going to cost, I think it's $94. $94 additional insurance. All right, it's going to go on the owner's policy. Now again, if you get the seller to pay for it, great. If you're representing the seller, just make sure your seller's not paying for it. Farm and ranch, it gets a little different. Farm and ranch, if that is their homestead, all right, it's going to be 5%. If it has an ag on it, ag exemption, it's going to be 5%. If it doesn't have an ag, if it's not their homestead, it's going to be 15% of the title premium. And when you're talking about $3 or $4 million sales price and a premium, that's that's going to be 15% of that. So that's going to get up in the thousands. So make sure you have that conversation. But for farm and ranch, I highly recommend it because the legal descriptions can be off so much. You're not really worried about, but it also covers minerals. So you got to make sure that, that's right. So it's really important. So if you'll remember, it's minerals, encroachments, and restrictions. So let's say, for instance, title that you look and you say, I don't see any restrictions, and the seller says, I don't think that there's any restrictions, but on the property that your buyer's wanting, because they want to put a chicken coop, because everybody now, cost of eggs, everybody wants a chicken coop, everybody wants chickens. So everybody's doing chicken coops. So then you realize, okay, and then title comes up, and remember on Schedule B, number 1 is what? That's where always it's going to be your restrictions are going to be on there. So if there's nothing in there, there's no volume of page, there's no restrictions. Well, what if title missed them? What if there really is restrictions on the property? They just missed them, or they didn't see them or whatever, and then the buyer moves in and they start building their chicken coop, and then somebody comes along and says, there's restrictions, you can't have chickens. Okay, so now you got a problem. Now the underwriter's got a problem. You don't, okay? So that's why it's so important. And that's why if you're representing the buyer, are you always going to get that insurance? Yes. Always, always get it. And then some, what if it's lot and block and Tyler, like his address, been there forever? You still have other things that it covers, not just the survey. Another thing about the survey. So let's say you ask for that endorsement, okay, that additional survey coverage, and you have a really old survey that you're using. It's going to be up to the underwriter, number one, to say, I'm going to insure this. I've only seen them come back one time, one underwriter come back one time and say, I'm not willing to give that insurance, it's too big of a risk, all right? We're just once, so not very often, but they do. Or they may come back and say, I'm going to require a new survey if you want this endorsement. Then you have that conversation with your buyer. How much is a new survey? And my question would be, what do they see on that survey that they don't like? Why are they asking for a new one? Because that, to me, that would sound like maybe I'd really do need this insurance. Talk to your buyer. If the buyer says, no, I don't want it, I don't want a new survey, fine, amend the contract, you're good. If you don't, I would talk to, you know, what I would recommend, call an examiner that got that commitment back that said they're going to require a new survey, and ask that underwriter why they're not doing it. Maybe just because it's too old, it's been used too many times, the T47 is not, you know, not that clear, whatever, something like that, okay? So remember, it's up to the underwriter if they're going to insure it. Any questions on this? I know it's confusing because it's not really your world, and I wish they really would put more in that paragraph to explain it, especially the cost. There's no cost or anything like that. They really should add that, because when you say you want it, you don't have any idea what you're buying most of the time, or the cost it's going to be. So I wish TREC would fix that and let you know what the cost was, but I'm not on that board. All right, so page 3, 2022, TREC made a small revision with the word survey in D. No other revisions were made. I think it's important to discuss. It's about objections to exceptions that are disclosed on Schedule B. Okay, so this is about exception documents. Does everybody know what an exception document is? Okay, so exception documents are going to be your leases, are going to be exceptions that are going to, everything that comes up on Schedule B. Schedule B is the exception. What it means is title company is going to take exception to all of this on Schedule B, means it's not going to be insured, all right? And so that on Schedule B is going to be your restrictions, it's going to be your leases, it's going to be your encroachments, everything like that that pertains to the property that you're not going to get insured, but you need to know what it is. So if you're representing the seller and you have leases, which is an exception document, if you have leases, restrictions, anything like that, I would get those and then attach to that contract, have it ready. Why? Okay, so let's say it takes you 20 days, business days, or 3 weeks to get a title commitment. And the buyers now, they've figured out that they really don't want this property, they want something else. So they're going to look at any way to get out of this contract, because we're past option now. We got to find a way to get out. So they can get out if they see those, if Schedule B comes up and all those exception documents are listed and they weren't part of the contract, they can get out of it. Remember, that's what it says. You have so many days of title policy to, so many days to back out of this contract. They can do that. But if you have everything listed, or the document that say, let's say that you didn't have, there was an Exxon lease and it wasn't attached, you didn't have it, and then the buyer gets Schedule B and they realize that lease wasn't on there. So they can walk? Yeah, they can. They don't want that property because they didn't have that exception. They don't like that because it pertains to property. If it was attached to the contract and you put it in that area, you write it in that area, and it asks for the volume page and everything, and it's going to be on there because they have to be recorded in property records. And you can call your examiner if the seller, I have no idea, call your examiner, tell them pull everything that's attached to this property and send me a copy of every exception document that's attached to this property. They will. They'll send them all to you. You've got all that information. You just put it in that area about the volume and the page where you've notified that buyer that they're buying that property, and that's what's going to show up on Schedule B. And if they sign that contract and accept all that, when they get that title commitment, they cannot back out. Okay? Does that make sense? Why it's so important? All right? Now, if you represent the buyer, instead of wasting your time, get those exception documents up, because you don't want to waste 3 weeks and then realize now we got to terminate the contract because we didn't know there was a lease that's, for the next 100 years that affects all, most of the land, and people are going to be coming back and forth. And restrictions and anything like that, you can get all of that from your title company, have it ready for when you get an offer, you can attach it to that contract. So they know, number one, what they're getting when they're buying this property, and they can't back out. Now, if there's something you missed, title didn't pull everything or something you missed, and then it's on Schedule B and they back out because of that, then they can. But, so when you get Schedule B, if you represent the seller, you get Schedule B. Your examiner, they can pull a preliminary title commitment. It's not going to be like a title commitment. What they do is they just show everything that's attached to the property and property records. It takes them that long to do it. Legal, they pull everything up and they send it to you. And then that's a good way to get with your seller and say, do you remember all this? Because there could be a lease in there that the seller's not a party of, but it's attached to that property. It was somebody that leased it before, that owned it before, that signed that lease. So, they may not even be a part of that lease, but you still need a copy of all those documents. Page 4, okay, the Public Improvement District. This is a new paragraph that they added. It's called a PID. Don't have them here in this area. And I think there's one in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but I don't teach up there. I don't really have that many realtors up there. I have Rockwall in Rowlett, but it's not one in there. PID, a Public Improvement District, is like what? A MUD, Municipality Utility District. And what is that? That's an additional property tax, okay? That's why they have this attached, because now that's what they call it. And it could be an additional property tax. And that's part of the contract, because why? Because in some areas they have this additional property tax. And sometimes it's just on there for 10 years. It's usually not on there forever. But if you don't know, if you're in an area and you're not familiar